All right, everybody, welcome back. What we're going to do really quick is I want to talk a little bit about your project that you're working on and how are you going to assess color under part of your line for presentation. So I want to show you a bunch of samples from different artists because actually what we're about to talk about goes much broader than you might think it, because putting color underneath a character has a lot to do with how you understand rendering techniques. But some of you have never had a rendering course. Some of you might have limited techniques. Some of you might not know Photoshop that well, but you might know SketchBook Pro, which is fine. So what I thought I'd do first is I thought I'd show you guys a couple previous student samples that other students have finished in this course. And then there are also a couple of good questions. Not only am I talking about line and color right now on how to present your work, I'm also talking about presentation and also talking about displaying part of your steps, which I'm totally fine with. So here's sample work from Maddie Hodges that she did, okay? As we're looking at Maddie's work here, I'm also going to bring up an image right here of her silhouette studies that she did. Because somebody already came up to me and asked me, Phil, could I take my silhouette studies and can I arrange them and place them on a piece of 11 by 17 paper? The answer is 100% yes. That's a great thing to put into a portfolio because it shows your process and it demonstrates your thinking ability and your problem solving ability, and it shows me how you got from point A to point B, okay, which is huge. So there's nothing wrong with doing that. And the reason why I wanted you to see this is I can do another demo later on how to make a presentation page. I actually have a couple older ones up, but I'm more than happy to show you little tricks and little techniques on what you can do. But today's goal is to talk a little bit about what a presentation page is, how you present your work, but it's also to talk about how you're putting simple color underneath your line weight, okay? So Maddie here, when you look at her color work right here, her color work's actually pretty simple. She's assigned really local colors to her characters. When she's done, she goes in and takes a lasso tool and selects one area that's going to be shadow. So if you follow the cursor right here and we come along this edge, do you see that little shadow line there? So there's a couple ways that you could do that. You can paint it all local color first underneath your line layer. And I'm going to show you how to do that in SketchBook Pro in just a minute. It's really efficient. The other thing you could do is you could then come back on your local color and you could then paint a shadow area on top of another layer. And if it's on a separate layer, it's easier that way because then you can blur it or modify it or adjust it while you're working. That's huge, okay? So some students prefer to keep their stuff on all one layer. I wouldn't really recommend that. I would always start with one layer being a local color layer, then go shadows, then go highlights, and if you have a chance, you can go a little bit of texture. So you don't have to go texture, and I'll show you more of a rendered approach. You don't have to go a rendered approach. A rendered approach is when we completely lose our line of the character, and it's actually 3 to 5 times more difficult and more time consuming. I'm not asking you to do that. Some of you will grow into that later in due time, but you don't have to do that right now. Okay? I want to here's another example from Maddie too. So here's another presentation that Maddie did. Okay? What's the difference here? Looking at this character on the left, is there any line there? No, the line's gone now. She's now painting underneath and she's pulling up enough solidity on the character to where the character holds when you turn off the line. That's really hard to do and it takes a lot more practice and it's a totally different style. Okay, so I wanted to show you that example, but what's really cool about this in terms of presentation is she has the one key character there finished and she has this nice little graphic orientation. Okay, so whenever you put color behind your characters, here's the golden rule. They need to be soft pastels. Pastels are colors that have more white in them, not saturated colors. I always have a student that will do a saturated color. So some of you are like, well, what's a saturated color, Phil? How does that work? So let me pull up Photoshop really quick. I'm going to pull up the color picker and I'm going to just briefly describe what the difference is, okay? Because you always have students that seem to struggle, and that's okay. Some of you have not had a background yet in understanding principles of color and color theory and how things work. So this is what your basic color arrangement is. If I click on my color picker right here, okay, this color to the far right, that blue, is completely saturated. That's like pure chroma and color right there. If I slide over here to the left, you see how it's getting lighter? This is the soft pastel area. This is where I'm adding white into my color and I'm making it very soft. Soft colors read very easy, okay? If I add black to my color, I come down into this corner. I'm taking my local color and I'm adding a lot more black tint to it. That's why white and black are tints and shades. They're technically not color, okay? That's really important because I have students put that right there as a color behind the character, and what's going to happen? It kills your whole design and your character because the color is so rich and saturated, you can't see any of the other color that exists on the character, okay? All right, so you can see here with Maddie, look at the very soft grays. So here's just a real simple approach. Soft grays, either a cool gray or a warm gray. What kind of gray is that, folks? It's more of a warm gray. It's a very soft, subtle, warm gray, meaning that it's a gray that's a little bit more towards the red local color, and it's a little bit more warm and inviting. You could do the same thing depending on the character. I'll show you some samples in a minute where you can go a little bit more to the cool side. In this example, all I care about is seeing your finished work. But if you want to do something like this where you want to name your character and you want to put in a couple rough sketches and you want to show me your finished character that's up there like that, if you want to go to this level, go for it. Use Maddie as an example. This is a great presentation. It looks fantastic, okay? And then on top of all this, I happened to come across one of Maddie's newer pieces that she did. And here it is, and let me zoom in, okay? So on this character right here, pretty cool, okay? There is a line on that character. It's a simple cleanup line. It's very tight. Underneath that cleanup line, there is only what? Local color. There's no indication of light source direction, is there? No. It's just local color. That's all you have to do. That's literally you going under your line and just adding color to it underneath the line, and that's it. You don't have to go in and put highlights and shadows. Do you see how well that page reads right there? It's very simple. It's very easy. Okay, so now that we're done with that, let me go over and let me show you some other artists. And first thing I'd like to do, outside of Maddie, I'd like to show you another student that I have. Okay, this is Trevor Wright. Okay, so when you look at Trevor's stuff, Trevor did some character designs in this class, and he went a little bit more into the superhero realm. And the superhero realm is more tight anatomy. Okay, so we're talking about, with superhero, we're talking about like Warner Brothers, MGM used to do a lot of superhero stuff. So you have more, you're talking G.I. Joe, you're talking more 7 to 8 heads high. Okay, but his line is really simple. Okay, it's not overcomplicated. And then here's another example. Okay, this fits very well. Again, what are you noticing right now about the presentation that looks very nice? He has the characters painted. There's simple line. On the paint, there's only local color, and there's only, what else did he add? Shadow, that's it. And how do you add shadow? You can select it with the lasso tool, go to levels and darken it, or you can paint it on a separate layer and just paint the shadows on top. In terms of presentation, what else did Trevor do? He put the little line down there and he separated the ground plane so the characters have something to anchor to. He then took the existing image of the character, he turned it into black and white, and he put a drop shadow under the character. He then faded it off. That acts as an anchor to bring your character down. The other thing that he did is he did this little technique that I showed students where you can grab some type of graphic imagery or halftone that's available on the internet, and he slapped it down behind the characters. And then up on the top, he put his silhouette read of all the characters, so that way he can show you how they all read differently versus looking at the characters up close. You're now looking at the characters with their local color on there, which is really important because we already talked about that. There's a huge importance in visual reads and shape language, and that's why it's there. Do you see how wonderful that page is? Not only that page, look at some of Trevor's other work that he did too. Look at how great that page reads. See that? All the characters are different. So here's my thing about stylistic approaches to this assignment. So you guys had the opportunity where you could have done these characters very realistic, or they could have been done for a video game. You can do it sort of TV superhero style, or you can do it more Disney XD. You can do it stylized. It's completely up to you. But here's the great thing about Trevor and why I like his work so much. He still has this great realistic TV feel, but then Trevor can turn around and do this. And he can work in a Steven Silver sort of Nickelodeon approach, which is this. Curved lines, thick and thin black lines, and then again, what's under there? Local color only. There's no shadows, there's no highlights, there's no texture. Okay, so some of you might be wondering, well, then what are my options? And part of the answer for you is it's all about rendering, and it's about your ability to understand rendering. When you get to a full level of rendering, this is a great example. This is CreatureBox. These are the two key designers for Insomniac Games. Look at their work. Not only do you have line that's cleaned up in here, you have local color. On top of the local color, you have core shadows, you have highlights, then you have something else, which are texture gradients. You have little indications of textures wrapping around the character. They're adding a higher level of detail. Okay? So when you get to this type of drawing and designing, here's a great example. Look at the bug on the left. Look at that highlight coming down. So now we're talking about principles of rendering, which are, if you have a round sphere, you have a dedicated light source hitting that sphere. You have what we call a specular highlight. You have a core shadow, and then the specular highlight bounces back, and we get what's called reflective light. So if you look on this character right here, here's that sort of highlight coming off the body, right? Here's the core shadow, and then if you look down here, this reflective light painted on the character. This takes double to triple the amount of time, but the outcome of it is this type of drawing work. The other thing that's really cool is the first thing you should always look for when you look at any type of coloring of a character is there line or not line? In this example, there is line, but what you do is after you spend some time rendering part of your character. So someone asked me once, Phil, what's your definition of rendering? Rendering is when you get in and you start to indicate specular highlights, reflective light, core shadows on a character. That's when you're starting to render. When you're not doing that, and you're doing the examples I just showed you with Trevor, you're basically just filling in local color, selecting an area for shadows, and if you want, you might select an area of highlights. It really shouldn't take you more than 30 minutes to color a character, one character. You have 3 to do. It should take you an hour and a half of just blocking in a color. The only difference is you might have to make a decision on what you want to do with your line. If you want to change your line color from black to another color, I'll show you how to do that in just a couple minutes, okay? Here's another example from CreatureBox. This is absolutely fantastic, okay? It's a great example of the texture. Do you see the robot's arms? Do you see the gradient flow of texture going over that? Okay? Super fantastic way to work. All right, and by the way, guess what software these guys are working in? SketchBook Pro, software you're using. And there's a way to work in SketchBook Pro to get these results, and I'm going to tell it to you right now, and then I'm going to show you Sergio Pablo's work as well. He does the same thing. Here's how you do it. You have a base layer up on top, which is line. You have another layer down below, which is local color. You never paint on that local color. You then go to another layer and you add in your shadows. You add in another layer, which is highlights, and then you add in another layer, which is texture. Okay, that's it. You keep everything separated on different layers. It makes it very easy to adjust. Okay, all right. Let me show you another artist who also likes to use SketchBook Pro. All right, this is Sergio Pablo's. This image right here that I've already showed you, it's a great example. That's all created on SketchBook Pro. So what you do in this case, you'll notice here, what color is the line now? Is it black? No, he's changed the color. He's changed it to like a dark burnt umbra, right? And it's a darker color because the color of his elephant is sort of this warm, orangish feel. So if you pick the local color, whatever the main local color is of your character, and you decide to go a little bit darker, you could change your line and that'll hold together very well. On this example, all he did, and I'll show you how to do this in a minute, is he filled it with one local color, and then it's really easy in SketchBook Pro to just click the lock transparency layer, and then it locks everything you filled, and you come back with the airbrush tool and you put a really simple gradient. But do you see how well that reads? Is there any shadows in there? Not really. There's just a gradient on there. There's no highlights, okay? There's no coarse shadow. It reads really simple. Now, if Sergio wanted to, he could come back into that and he could put textures on there, highlights. He could really take his characters to a rendered face. So one of the biggest things that I have to do as your instructor is tell you guys, you don't have to render your characters. You don't have to lose the line and spend 3 hours on a character. If you want to do that, that's completely up to you, okay? Let's take a look at another sample from Sergio. Here's another example where this is SketchBook Pro again. In this example, our line quality is almost dissipated. Do you see how there's pretty much no line there? Because the values are dark enough to hold the shape of the character. Now on here, do you see highlights and coarse shadows? Yes. This is a step up from what he did before. Now he's getting more into a rendering approach on his layers. Okay, I'm not asking you to do that. I just want to point out the similarity. By the way, look at the color swab behind the characters. What color is it? It's a soft pastel. What's your question, Frank? The multiply layer in Photoshop, because when you draw on a layer with white, if your line's not separate, the multiply layer allows you, it puts that layer into transparency and allows your color just to show up underneath.
I've seen him do it on here for like highlighting and like rendering.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if that was a good idea.
So I'm not sure what technique he's using in SketchBook Pro, but in Photoshop, it's really common. We take a line layer, I turn it on to multiply because it makes that line transparent, and then I go underneath it and I start painting. So I do that with my tonals all the time because a lot of times I'm given somebody else's work. Let's say I'm given a storyboard panel, an environment, or a character. Someone asks me to paint it, whether it be tone or color. The first thing I do is I have it up on top, I turn it to multiply, and now I'm painting on layers underneath it. As I'm painting and developing that character, I go back into the opacity of that line and I start to drop it and bring it down. Because by the time I'm finished, my line weight might only be about 10 or 15% because now the color of my character is holding enough shape and form where I don't have to have the line at 100%. So remember, black line flattens characters, and I'm going to get into that into a minute. That's actually part of animation style, and I'll talk about that in just a second. It actually came from feature films, and it came from Disney, and I'll show you an example of that in just a heartbeat, okay? All right, what I like doing is showing you guys samples of different artists so you see how they're working. So here's another image here from Sergio Pablo, okay? This is really simple line with local color underneath, okay? Are there highlights? No. Are there shadows? No. Is there even a sense of a light direction? No. You don't have to do that. All I'm asking you to do is pretty much give me this for next class. You don't have to go in there and do all that other stuff. You just put really simple local color under your work and you're done. That's a presentable sheet, isn't it? Not? Does that not look professional to you? So it's about the designs. You don't have to get caught up into all this rendering and overkill your characters. I have students do this every single semester, and I come back to, no, just keep it simple, keep it easy, and stay simplistic, okay? So let me show you an example. There's so many different things I have up here that we're talking about, and I just want to quickly go over this. Who's that guy? That's Bart, right? Part of Bart, this is a little bit different. They put a shadow on this because it was used for something else. Part of television animation is about the simplicity and the cost efficiency of creating an animated show. And part of that comes from this right here. It comes from feature animation. Back in the day, Disney Studios, one of the simple principles to have an animated feature was to just take a simple black line and put local color into it. And 101 Dalmatians is a perfect example of that. Now, there were some other shows that changed that a little bit. An example of that is Winnie the Pooh. In Winnie the Pooh, they took a really simple line, they put local color under it for the characters, but then what they did to make the show look different is the backgrounds are line with watercolor underneath. So then you have a character walking, and the whole background has this nice, soft, fluffy sort of feel to it. In fact, if you want, I didn't grab this. Let me grab a sample right here on a new window. And if I go pick up, let's go to Google real quick. And if we type in Winnie the Pooh animation, and then we click for an example here on an image, there's the perfect example right there. So it's a little hard to see. Pooh is one local color, but look at the background. The background is line, and it's watercolor underneath. That's a fantastic style. That's a style that works really great for children's books. And to be honest with you, that's why Winnie the Pooh has always done so well. Here's another example of it. See Pooh? He's just line and simple color. And I know this because I worked on a Winnie the Pooh movie. I worked on the Heffalumps movie, and I had to go in and I had to draw a whole bunch of all the environments I did had to match this type of style. And then the colorists would go under and put watercolor underneath it. And then the characters were always simple local color. So that is a simple style and approach that came from Disney. And part of this has influenced the way television animation works to this day. In fact, what I wanted to show you is I grabbed a couple samples of current shows that are on Disney XD. Okay, so by the way, here's another example of 101 Dalmatians. So again, simple line. In fact, one of the things they did in 101 Dalmatians, which was sort of cool, in the background, they would on purposely shift the local color of an object over. Do you see the curtains? Do you see it painted outside the line? It was to create sort of this graphic impression of what's happening, and they would do that quite often in some little areas where they would shift little lines around, and then you kept the characters very simplified. Okay, look at this right here. What's that? It's Gravity Falls. Okay, so Gravity Falls, part of the backgrounds, the environments have more tonal detail in them. They have a little bit of a gradient. The characters are very simple color. So part of what has happened is that the development and the expansion of TV-related shows, okay, keep a certain style and influence into the way the visual read of the characters is taking place in far of like an illustration narrative, okay? And when you look at these examples, most of your characters are really simple local color with just one or two light, maybe if lucky, a highlight on them. And then after that, the backgrounds get a little bit more interesting and decorative with color. In fact, here's a stylistic. Look at the line on these characters. Some of the line quality is completely changed. Yes, sir? Yes, that's right. Okay. And look at how the line on this character has a different color, and it's changing on different parts of his body. On his pants, the line is gray. On his arm, the line color is what? A brown. On his head, it sort of disappears. So if you look at the character over here with the red hair, the line around him is now turned red. The line around his skin color is a warmer variant. Okay, that's how some of the styles change and adapt, and a lot of that comes from the influence of basic animation. Okay, here's another artist I wanted to show you really quick. Talk about it's Cory Loftus. All right. So one of the cool things about Cory, he works in some different styles, and how would you guys, the students that know Cory Loftus, how would you identify part of his work? What would you say? You'd say it's very Disney-ish, right? It has that feel. Well, what is Disney? Not only is it the way that the characters are drawn, but it's also the way that the line is interacting with the characters. And it's usually part of Disney style was very simple, thin line on cleanup with just really simple local color underneath, really limited shadows. Okay? In that same context, though, here's a really cool sketch, and now you can see where part of the line has been thinned down and modified. Right? This is an advantage of us looking at other artists and looking at their character lineup and seeing how they make things. All right, so in this example, it's just really simple local color, but he's changing the values of the local color in different areas of the character. Here, the local color is darker. Here it's lighter. There it's lighter. The shirt is one local color. He has different stripes on it. So he's graphically sort of playing with the local colors to add a little bit more detail. So you could do that on your shell. You might make a couple parts of the shell of your turtle darker, and then as they come forward, you make them lighter. You know, you don't have to do that rendering. You could do it just by assigning local color to the shell, and it'll give you that sort of visual read. Okay? Here are a couple other examples. Now, what happened here? Where's the line? The line's gone now. Line sort of poofed. He probably went back into his line and filled it, and you can see a little bit on here. You can see a little bit of darker color underneath part of this. So the line was in there, but then he went and he filled the line color to match the local color of the characters to get it to blend in. It creates a different style or approach. So one of my answers to you guys as students, in this example from Cory, there's a lot more rendering. There's shadows in there now. You have a line. You have highlights. Because students are always, how should I take my characters to a finished piece? And part of me comes back and goes, it depends on what your rendering abilities are. Some of you, how many people in this class have had rendering? How many people have had Photoshop? Some of you have never even had those classes yet, so you might be a little bit more limited. I have some students that only use like Paint Tool Sci and Clip Studio Pro and your iPads with Procreate, which, by the way, if you didn't know, Photoshop just released their full version of Photoshop with Kyle's brushes on it for your iPad. If you go look into it, you can download that. It's fully out there now. I think it was released this week. Okay, everyone's like running now. But at first it was going to be a partial release. They did the full release with Kyle's brushes. So now that completely changes your flexibility of being able to work digitally, because now you don't have to buy an expensive Cintiq. At home, you can be working off one of the new iPads with a new chip, and you can still crunch that information. Back to this. Look at the highlights and the shadows in here. Do you see them? Okay, that's a lot more time, different styles. So I'm not asking you to jump into a really difficult style. I'm asking you to start with simplicity and slowly build up your style. Slowly try some over the semester and do something different. Not everyone's going to be working from the same approach and background. Here's something else that's really cool why I like this. Look at the characters' faces. There are highlights and little shadows on those faces. Do you see them? Look at the clothes. They're plain Jane. They're simple. Why would the artist want to put little highlights and more attention to detail on the faces? Because that's the focal point. That's where you look. So the artist keeps you focusing on one area. Does he want you looking at the bottom of the knees and the pants? No. He keeps that very simple. He puts all the TLC, all the little rendering, the little highlight right on the nose, the little shadows, the reflective light, the bounce light, the little hairs, the dark to light, the gradient transition up here, all that's kept on the face. Why? That's the focal point. If you go in and render the heck out of a bird's wing, where am I going to look? At the bird wing. So don't do that. Keep it simplified. Okay? That was Cory. Let me go back. I had a couple others. We talked about, who else did I not show? We did Maddie. Here, I want to show my buddy Patrick Ballesteros. Patrick creates these really simple cards that he sells at like Con and ATN. They're like little prints. They're called 25-cent wonders, where he takes a character and he might do a little bit of a version of Star Wars or superhero movie or whatever, and he puts them together. Okay? So that's from Star Wars, right? It's just simple line. He is doing a little bit of rendering, but he keeps it very simplified. Patrick also does these, though. These are high defined renderings. They're paintings that he sells. So these have 80% more time placed into the rendering and the light because these are more illustrations. That's a rendering difference. And that is just, it's hard for me to explain to students when they ask me, how should I color my character? Because I'm going to come back and go, for me, I just need simple local color because most of you are going to go from here your job is to try to get into the industry. The best pathway into the industry is going to be through television animation or through children's books. And going that way, it's really simple local color to start off. Later on, as you get more advanced, you learn more rendering techniques. You learn how to use Photoshop brushes. You learn different techniques. You look at different artists. Everybody paints and works totally different. So you learn these techniques over time and you build up skill sets. And that's why I wanted to take this time to show you guys all these different variations between all these different artists, because everybody works differently. No one has just one single approach that they do. There's 10 different ways. And then one of my other students, Evan Green, yesterday showed me this really cool technique that an artist does when they do the shape of like a character and they put Frisket down. You guys know what Frisket is? Frisket's a clear film used for airbrushing, and they put it around the character's body. And then they go in and they paint with a sponge and do all this wild crazy, and then they pull it up, and there's this nice crisp edge around the character's body, and it looks really fantastic. Then they go in there and they put a couple highlights for the face and the character, and then the artist sells it as an authentic, real print because it has original paint on it. It's no longer a digital copy. It's a great, simple way to work, and that's another stylistic approach into something. Okay, so let me close all these examples, and let me stop the recorder real quick. All right, so here's my character that I created, and here's one of the really cool things about this program is that if you just click that lock button on the layer, and if I come back over, and if I pick like a darker green, and then if you come back in here, take like the airbrush tool, as soon as I come in here, if I make my brush a little bit bigger, can you see what it's doing? It's changing my line to a darker green. See how quickly it did that? I didn't have to do anything. I just hit one button. And then let's say my feet are going to be like a darker version of yellow or orange. Now, these little colors I'm picking, what's really cool is on your color picker here. See how I just moved that down? It showed me that's the color that I have right now. If I want to keep that color for my line weight, I just touch it and drag it into a swab and pull it down underneath. And see how it drops in there? So that might be my line weight for my feet, but then the color of my feet are going to be this color, so then I drag that down. So that's really cool. I have those two swabs right there. So now I can touch this. I'm on my line layer. I could come in here and see how cool that is? I'm changing my line color to match the character, the part of the character. So I just made his shell a dark green. I made his feet a darker umber color. And then maybe his skin color, I might come over here and go, hey, I like that skin color, but I want it to be a little bit darker for his skin. I'm going to grab that swab there. So now I know those swab differences. And I can even grab that one and put it right there. So I have them all next to each other. You create those swabs because then when you're painting, you just come back and forth and you touch to remember. Okay, so that's part one, is changing the line color. All right, here's the next thing you have to understand. The way SketchBook works is it works on filling, where you have a local color. So for me to paint my shell right now, what I have to do is this. I have to create another layer underneath. I'm going to take this color here, this green, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop my line layer down so I can barely see it. I'm going to come back to my layer underneath. I'm going to take either my solid pencil or a solid marker, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to make my pencil a little bit thicker. Look at my line there. I need it thick so when I draw a line it connects. See how it connects? There's no break in the line. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here, I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to draw around my character one solid line like this where the shell is. And the reason why I do this is once I have this all connected, it will fill that whole entire element with one touch of a button. Once that is filled, I can also use that layer as a selection to paint. Unless you have another approach, this is a really simple, time-effective way. So there, now that I have that done, I'm on a separate layer, right? I'm going to come over here and touch in the middle of my layer. I'm going to drag to the right where that A is. I'm going to name that layer. I'm going to call it Turtle Shell. Now it's labeled. Look, I come over, I touch the bucket, and I just touch right in the middle. What did it just do? It filled that whole entire layer just with the color. So now if I come back to my line and I turn up my line, you see what just happened? I have my line sitting on top, and I could change the color of my line any way that I want. And then I could come down here to turtle shell, and I could adjust this any way that I want. And here's why this is so friendly, is that once you have this selected, if I were to lock on this and turn the lock on there, oops, oh no, I just went into stupid precision mode. How did I do this? I hate getting out of this. Hold on. Sorry about that. I had a little problem with the Cintiq. So once I have this selected, what's really cool, and this is how Sergio Pablo's works too, and a lot of other artists, is remember how I clicked that lock? Now if I click that lock on the color I just painted, I can do all kinds of things. I could go in there and I could put a gradient real quick. So look, I could take my airbrush right now, come like this. I can make my airbrush big, and I could go. See that? It's masking it for me just by me hitting the lock. So look at that. I can airbrush the shadow side on there. Okay, let's say I want to come in, I want to add some other textures. I prefer to do this on a separate layer, but I could just add another layer. I would relabel this and call it turtle shell texture. Let's try that again. T-U-R-T-L-E. Okay, so there it is. It's a separate layer. Now I'm on as a separate layer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and let me go to the brush section. Let me see. Had markers. Let me see what some of the other brushes they used to have on here. Your texture essentials right here. Do you see this? And there's a bunch. And then I have some of these synthetic paints. I have some traditional. I have some scratchy little guys here. I'm not telling you have to do this. I'm just showing you how. So let me go to texture essentials. Let me take this brush right here and then see what it does. It does this weird dotty thing, right? So I'm going to come over, make that a little bit darker, and then I'm going to leave this window up here in my brush library, and I'm going to come over and throw some texture on top of my character real quick. You don't have to do this. I'm just showing you how it's done. And then since that's on a separate layer, whatever I don't want to use, I can just come back over, take my eraser, and I can just erase it in a second and go like this, right along my character. And if you look, where's that texture now? It's on my character. Do you see how it's spattered all over his shell? And what's really cool is I can adjust the variance of that. In fact, if I have texture on that and I really want to use it again, I can just say select all, copy, paste. And look, I just pasted the texture. And I could even bring the texture onto another part of my character, like over here. And then I like that. I'm going to close that. And then I'm going to go back to my eraser, and I'm just going to erase any of the overflow that's on there. And look, there it is. And I can merge that. There's my texture layer now, and then I can merge that down below to the layer below. And there's my texture again. Okay? Even above that, if I want to take it another step above, what I could do is go to my lasso tool, and I could come in here on this. I could select little parts of his shell. And maybe these I want to look a little different. So maybe these should be more of a lighter green. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to move up on here, go to a little bit lighter green, offset, something with a little bit more white in it. Ooh, I like that color. I don't want to forget it, right? What do? I grab that color. I drag it down to here, next to my other colors. Then I come back up here, I have my airbrush tool, and now I'm going to come along and I'm going to airbrush those little differences there. In fact, if I want, I can even come in here and really push. I might airbrush the tops of those little details, and then I'm going to come back here and drop down to a darker value, bring that down here again, and then I'm going to make my airbrush a little bit smaller. My airbrush right now is really huge, and then I'll airbrush a little bit of a dark value under that, like that. Like so, like that. Okay, like that. So let me hit deselect, and now look at the difference. You see what I just did? I'm building up layers on top. So if I take all these off right now, if I take that off, what am I back to? I'm back to my local color with a little bit of value on it. Okay, so what's cool about SketchBook Pro is I can keep building this up very efficiently and it takes me a matter of seconds to change my line color. Okay, so that was just the turtle shell. So let's turn turtle shell off. What happens if I want to get in here and I want to paint my character himself? So I have to do the same thing. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to pick the color I want my character to be. I'm going to select the layer, or I'm going to label it so I don't forget. I'm going to call it turtle body local color. Okay, there it's labeled. I'm going to take my pen. I'm going to draw along the outside of his face. I'm going to wrap over here. I'm going to come back down. And this is where you mentally sort of have to break down what is happening with my character right now, right? I have his body like this, and what's happening with my character, my character also has rope on him, right? And he has a shell. So I would have to go back and do this for also the rope and the shell, but I could do that later as I'm progressing. I'm going to get the feet in here. He has that little necklace. I'd have to do that later, because my character is constructed of a shell, an undershell, a head, a body, the feet. I might end up changing all of those. Right now I'm just doing the basic color approach. There, I got that filled in. Oops. I have that here. Okay, now that I have that done, and I forgot to lower my line there. If I lower my line, the reason why you always lower your line value is see where I skipped. So what happens if I skip a little line like that if I go to fill it? Does anyone know? It's going to fill everything. So if I touch right there, you're like, ah, why did you do that? Well, that's why. So I got to come back here, and I have to come back to my line, come back to my brush, and then go over this and fill that little area there. Now I look at it and I look, oh, I accidentally missed part of my foot there by accident too. I missed this little loop in there. Now that those are done, I can come back. I just take my bucket and I just touch. So when I touch there, I forgot the lower part down there still. And that's there. So now that I have that, now that I touch it, boom, it's filled, it's filled, it's filled, and it's filled. However, back here, it's really hard to see. It didn't fill there, right? Why? Let me zoom in and show you. My lines aren't closed. I left a little space right there. Do you see it? So I come back with my brush. Oops. I'm on bucket tool. Go back to brush, and I just touch that. And now if I zoom back out, there, it's completely filled. I grab my bucket. Boom, I filled it. Now, I've noticed sometimes with a darker color where that little selection line is, it leaves a little white line. Can you guys see that little white line there? That bugs me sometimes. I'm a little bit of a perfectionist. So what I might do is come back in with a marker tip, and I just drag my pencil over the white line, and I just quickly fill it up like so. There. Let me get that done. Let me get a little bit more wedge shape. Actually, that's not a good, that's the one I meant to grab. There we go. And I can just run this along like that. I accidentally touched over. Hold on. Let me erase. Let me get the hard-edged eraser. Hold on, I'm working too fast here. Let me get that smaller. There we go. Accidentally touched over there. So I get that fixed. That's done. I'm going to come back, and then I'm going to just take this guy. I'm going to run along just really quickly here, part of that line. Get rid of that little white line that's in there. Get that taken out of. Just takes me a couple minutes. There, that's done. I'll get this back leg done and get that white line. You don't have to do it, but I'm just picky. That way I want it. I don't want it to be seen, especially if I really get into this and start rendering the heck out of a character. I want you to be able to see the whole thing. Okay. There it is. I got that. Let's get this line. So once I have that line all done, there, it's all pretty much filled. There. So I have that finished now. So if I come back over, let me turn on my line. I'm going to raise it back up. Okay, so you can see, and if I turn on the turtle shell, turn on my little texture. So the black line is too overpowering there, right? So I might want to change that line color. And I have different options. You could leave your line all black and just thin it down. Okay, but I could also go in there really easy. If I just touch that layer, touch the lock layer, I have my skin color, which was this color. I'm going to darken a little bit darker to like maybe like a brown, like that. I'm going to drag that underneath. And then with that selected, I'm going to come back to my airbrush tool and lock the layer. Look, I'm going to just darken his line right now. See what happened to that big, thick black line? It's now changing a little bit because now it's becoming more of a brown line. And I'm modifying it really quickly. In fact, I even want to make it a little bit darker than that so it pops out a teeny bit more. And if I wanted to, I can even push like little areas, like maybe down here, it's a little bit richer. Maybe here it fades off, maybe a little bit there, maybe a little there. Okay, so then I could come back in and now I can start tweaking with this. I can put the layers up above it. I can put in some highlights. I might put in some shadows. It's just completely up to me. I can even select part of it. I can start here, put a layer up above it, and I might come in with my lasso and be like, hey, I want to put some little shadow areas right in here, so I'm going to select that part of his face right there. Maybe I'm going to put a little bit of a shadow in here by his foot. Okay, I'm going to come back over here. I might have a little bit of a shadow over here. And a little bit of a shadow back in there, like so. And then maybe back here under the shell area here. And I want to label that so I don't forget. So you see how quickly I made that selection. I'm on another layer. I have the color here. So I can go to a little bit darker. I can go to my airbrush tool right now. And then I can just come in here like this. Now I'm going to purposely put a hard edge on that chin because I want to show you, since it's on another layer, if there's something you did that you don't like. So let me hit deselect. So if that's too hard of an edge and I want to blend it in more, I just come to the round nose eraser here. It's on a different layer. I just widen it up and I just come along here and I erase and blend that in. And then what I can also do is I can even drop the opacity of that layer and get it to blend in. Oh my God, stupid precision mode. My hand keeps hitting it on the Cintiq. And then I could blend it in that way. So do you see how I'm just putting in my local color and how I can adjust my line? The difference is now I just need to go in here and spend a good 30, 40 minutes and just get everything filled out. I can start putting some little details or highlights, and voila, my character starts to come to life. Okay? It's actually quite fun. All right, I lost function of. All right, once again, my pen has died, so my mouse is only working now. So I'm gonna have to go back to mouse. Erase part of his eyes. I can start putting in more detail on his face. I can bring out some highlights. Even when I look at that local color, I still want to adjust it. It's a little too bold for me, so I could quickly do that too and go in there and keep working with it. But the really cool thing that I love the most about this software is like what I was doing up here with the shell, is I can just modify the line in like a heartbeat. And it just saves you a tremendous amount of time to be able to work, and it's just very efficient. Now that was one option. If you don't want to do that option, your other option is you can save your line you did in SketchBook Pro. You can bring it into Photoshop, and then you can just put some simple local color underneath and define it that way. Okay? All right, I'm going to stop the recorder. I'm going to keep working on my guy, but I need to look at some other people's work before class is done, and then I'll come back and finish this up at home, and then I'll post it up on the blog, all right? All right, so let's continue forward. I'm working in SketchBook Pro still, and there are some brushes and some items in here that I forgot a little bit because I'm usually at home, I really prefer to work in Photoshop, even though SketchBook Pro is great for drawing, and it's also really cool for blocking in some simple colors. There are a lot of cool things you can do with it. I think the back of my brain has sort of been trained to work in Photoshop because that's what I started with way back in the day. So what I'm going to do right now is go through here. I want to see how some of these different tools work, because I want to start pushing some of my shadows, simple coarse shadows on my character, so I can have a light and dark surface. That way I can round his form just a little bit. And there's a couple reasons why I want to do that. Is it adds a little bit more to the character, and it allows me to, the character is drawn in sort of a 3/4 front view, and if I bypass and add on a little bit of light or reflective light or some other elements, that's really going to work. So I'm going to highlight this area down here, I should say outline it, and I'm going to fill that. I'm going to work on that local color of the bottom shell. So that's going to be what you would see on the bottom shell, and I'm going to put that onto a separate layer. So that's what's sort of neat about how SketchBook Pro works, is you just have to keep everything on a separate layer. And then you can merge and commit to your layers a little bit later, but it allows you to see how it's, transitioning and working a little bit easier. And you have that lock option that we talked about a couple minutes ago. So that lock option really adds a lot to you being able to quickly go and work on something. Now, this is a demo in class. I did realize something that I did that I'll mention to you guys right now that was a little bit of a mistake on my part, is that when I cleaned this character up, he was actually in a smaller file. He was a 200 dpi file, and when I cleaned him up, he was only about 2 to 3 inches tall. So the problem with that is when I enlarged the character to be larger for presentation, my line drawing also enlarged with the character too. And so just in case some of you might be noticing that when you go to take something that's smaller and you enlarge it, it's going to change pretty drastically, and it's going to have a different effect on the character line weight. And so that did happen here, but the saving grace for me is that I've already sort of changed the color on the character's line weight, so that'll work a little bit easier in the way the character's interacting with its color, because it won't be as bold of a line and won't flatten it. If I had more time and I wasn't doing a quick demo, and this was for a project for a studio, since I enlarged the character by about 150 to 200%, I would go back in there and I would do a new line on it, and it would make it a lot easier. Okay, so what was I doing here? I think I was going back in here. I'm just adjusting some parts of the line. See, I was darkening a couple little areas. I'm just trying to find a good place where that line works, and I needed to quickly just adapt and change a couple things. So I wanted to make sure part of the line around the shell was a little bit more of a darker green, and then some of the line around the character is a little brown, and I just needed to adjust 1 or 2 areas very quickly. And also, from working earlier in the demo, I was doing it at a faster pace, and it's really easy to sometimes overlap something in paint that you had and you want to go in and fix it or change it a little bit. So I'm just sort of checking my layers right now, making sure everything is the way that I want it, and then I'm going to go in and start adding in some more detail to my character here. I'm outlining the rope now and placing this outline here, so I could just fill that with a local color and have that on a separate layer as well. So when you're sitting at home, or if you're in your little studio, or even if you're at school working and you're doing this and you're listening to music, it's a lot easier than when I'm doing it, because I'm busy talking, looking at the mic, I'm doing all this other stuff. You just get in a little bit of a flow. Now what happened there is I went to fill it and I didn't zoom in and check. And if I look in this real quick, you can see there's 1 or 2 little areas that I did not connect my line together. So because of that, I couldn't quite get that filled. And after I filled it, I touched on the outside and it filled the rest of that little, the little white line that can happen sometimes there. So when I look at it, I'm like, cool, I got my rope now around the character. I don't know why I put that rope there. I just thought it would be cool. Sometimes you add stuff to a character just to make it look different, or just to pull it to sort of like a different direction. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going through some different brushes in SketchBook Pro because I'm trying to find some scratchy feel. And I do this quite a bit whenever I'm painting something is, there's so many different brushes and so many options on how they work. It's nice sometimes just on the side of your paper, to just throw them down and see how they interact and if you get a texture that you like. So I could take that brush I just did and it had a sort of cool texture to it, and I'm going to put a little bit more green on it and come back and try to just ripen up the shell. Part of me was thinking of the shell as being similar to like an avocado, and I wanted to have it have a little bit more, just not a muted green, but with a little bit more color in it too. And then I also wanted to come in these little round dots on the shell. I wanted these to become little individual highlights as well. So this is just my way of sort of messing with the textures and seeing what I come up with, and just experimenting with some of the brushes. So going through and making the selection right now, I'm on a new layer up on top if you look to the right side, because I'm going to fill this with a new color to be like little highlighted textures, I guess you might say. And I don't want that color to interfere with the shell, so I'm going to put it on a separate layer. And then if I like it, I will commit to it and merge it down into the original layer of the shell itself. So there, I almost have all my selections here. I have quite a bit. So I had a good question from a student, which was, when do we want to work in SketchBook Pro? When do we want to work in Photoshop? And that's a great question. And there are different answers to that, because I personally, I can float between the both, because I really like to draw on both softwares. I really like SketchBook Pro for the sketching. There's a certain ease and flow that happens in SketchBook Pro. I think that's a little bit easier. But then there's a little bit more controls and specifics in Photoshop. So I really like that. You see what I did? I have those little bright highlights popping there. Now I'm looking for sort of a scratchy brush to come back on to some of those highlights, to put more of a little bit of like a yellow highlight on top of them. So I'm trying to find a brush that'll work decently. The other thing too, which is, I think it just happened this week, which is going to change a lot of things, is Photoshop is finally coming out with a decent version for iPad. And that's really going to change a lot of workflow and progression for people, because, before SketchBook Pro was great for drawing and sketching. That was a great tool for your iPad. And then, you had Clip Studio Pro, you had a couple of different versions of other, obviously Procreate, a couple other softwares that came out that were very efficient too. But I think there's just something about Photoshop and the flexibility of the way that it works that allows you to get in there. But I can't negate the simplicity of just working in SketchBook Pro, of what you can do really quick with some of the transparency layers and some of the other options, which is fun. So, I mean, I guess it just comes down to what you like in the end. And what... Also, if you're working on a Cintiq versus that tablet, is it portable, is it not? Another thing I was talking to a student about, a student told me that when they work in Photoshop, they have a lag when they're working in Photoshop. So the first thing when I think of that is, okay, you don't have enough RAM in your computer, or you're bogging your computer down, which means you might have too much information on your desktop. You might need to clean or defragment your hard drive, and that's going to allow the Photoshop to work a little bit easier. Okay. There's also settings and preferences under Photoshop for you to adjust the amount of RAM that's being allocated to the software to see how it's working. So I really so what I did here, see, I'm doing my little test demo here next to me, putting brushes on there. I have my little highlighted parts of my shell, and I changed them to a lighter color. Then I come back and I put a little bit of a shadow under them, so it looks like they pop a little bit more off the shell. It was really quick, only took a couple minutes to do. And it just changes the look of the shell. Now I'm going to come in, pencil in a couple like little skin freckles on my turtle. And I'm doing it full strength. And then I'm going to come back to the layer and drop down the opacity and then blend it in. And then I'll commit it back in and merge it. So I drop a layer down. There we go. It's nice and light. I just like that feel of being able to merge something in. I just think it works a little bit easier. It's more efficient. It's a little bit more friendly, and tends to look pretty good as well. Because I can control it. I'm not sitting there, I mean, sometimes you can do it if you get the right color and you have the right shade of that color right away. That could be cool, or, you know. Um, and another thing too, I think the way that I'm working here, I learned a lot of this from working with watercolor and having some watercolor classes from way back in the day, and going out and like just doing little plein air studies and paints and just goofing around. I mean, watercolor is about building up from light washes up to darker washes. And what's cool about going digital is then you know that. So sometimes you can have something darker, then you can come in and put something lighter, and you can work in the opposite way. But for the most part, just the way my brain sort of works, like here I went opposite there and put some darker images in there, darker textures. But for the most of the time, the way my brain works, it's easier for me to start from a lighter mass and build up and add in shadows, and dark and light sides, and then come back in and add in your texture, and then at the end of that, come back in and start to put in some little highlights and whatnot. So I wanted to try to get a little splash of color in here. To be honest with you, I'm just doing this real quick for the demo, but I really don't like the color of the lower shell. I'll probably mention that at the end here. I think when I finish getting some more shadows and highlights on this guy, I'm going to come back in and change the lower color of the shell, because to me it should look a little different because it's not exposed to the sun as much. So I definitely want to modify that at the end here. But for right now, the other thing that's really cool, you see that I popped up here are the Copic marker selections. What I really like about these in SketchBook Pro is they're really nice, simple gradients already there. So I don't have to worry about going in and picking colors. There's some really cool colors I can look at. And that's actually a fantastic, wonderful technique of coming from markers, is in the olden days of having your markers out on a table, being to look at the colors real quick, quickly change them, and put little dots or textures where you want them. You can really get characters to pop quite a bit. So I'm going to blacken the eyes here, get the eyes to pop a little bit. It's definitely a huge part of the character that's really important. And I also erase a little bit, coming in with a fuzzy brush now, and I'm punching just very lightly a little bit of shadow where the upper lip meets the lower lip. And then I'm also going to come in, try to address a little bit of that shadow on the side of the character, just around the form a teeny bit more, to get him to work. I'm going to put a little bit on the foot and just lightly building it up, just keeping it slow. Got some on the chin there. I got some on the back of the head. You see how it just rounds the head a little bit of shadow like that, a little bit on the chin. So that really does a lot to I'm just basically adding a little bit of a tint and shade to my local color by putting a very light airbrush stroke of a little bit of like a darker burnt umber brown on there. It rotates a little bit of the character's face just a little bit. Not rotates it. I can't talk today. Excuse me. It just adds a little bit of shadow to anchor down a light side from a dark side. Okay. So then if I come back and I put some little highlights down there, boom, it'll sort of pop the character a little bit. I'm still concerned about this little ridge right in here. It's sort of flat, and I think I sort of overworked this a little bit during the demo, because at the end of the demo I come back into it and I fixed it a little bit more, trying to address it. And I wanted it to turn a little bit, but actually what I'm doing here was sort of a mistake, because I was putting a little bit too much more detail on that ridge, and that's going to flatten it down. But that's all right. It's, hindsight's 20/20. So, you're going to make decisions on your character when you're coloring or painting. You might over render it, you might take it too far, and sometimes those are healthy stepping stones, because you make a decision on how to paint something and you realize it didn't come out the way that you want it. So that's a lesson learned. So next time you go to paint something, you could change it up a little bit, So I think I went a little bit lighter here. And one thing I don't like, and there might be a way to do this. I just don't know the hotkey in SketchBook Pro, but I like being able to hide my selection lines so I can't see them. That way I can adjust or darken something really quickly and see what it looks like. But there probably is a way to do it. I know like 10 people are probably going to be like, yes, you can do it really easy. I know. I'm working in, we have like 3 different versions of SketchBook Pro. We have a different version at school, and then we have the one that crashes on PCs, and then I have another older version that works, and then I have a couple different versions I have at home, which are the ones I bought before they went to the subscription license. And to be honest, I still like those. I think they work just as well. So sometimes you have different results. See, I still don't like the way that lip of the shell, it's not really popping, but I'll address that in a little bit here. Let me go in. I want to put some highlights on my character. See that? I just put some on the lower part of the chin. Again, my focal point on my character right now, it isn't really the shell, it's more the face. So I want to have the highlight right there. Get a little bit of something on his nose. A little bit where that lip is popping off right here. So I need to get something in there that feels right. I'm just trying to get the right tool. Some of these brushes I'm not too familiar with as much as my brush collection in Photoshop. So I just want to pop a little bit of that face. Not too much, just a teeny bit. You could select it and paint on top, but I actually prefer to paint it over on a separate layer, because then if I want to, I can blur in that highlight. I can adjust it through opacity. I have a couple other options that I can do, and then if it's something that I like what I just put down there like that, I feel like it's working pretty well in the character's face, then I can just come back into it and blend it or adjust. Put a little bit on the back leg here. A little bit over there. That's pretty cool. So just what I'm doing here, just with the shadows, a little bit of the highlights. I like what it's coming together on part of the face. And now I'm looking back at the shell, I'm getting picky, and I'm like, no, I don't like the shell. I want to redo it. But it's all right. For right now, for the demo, just get it done. And once I get some type of a soft pastel color strip behind this, it'll really allow the character to sort of pop off the page, and the visual read will work a lot better. So here I was merging a couple layers, committing, and then I wanted to come back here and I wanted to adjust a little bit more. I wanted to get a little bit more of a shadow back in here, so I was thinking of putting, and this is probably a mistake on my part, I put more of a blue shadow because I'm trying to have the cool against the warm. But after I did this, I sort of regretted it and thought maybe I should have stuck with a little bit more of a just a darker green, and then allowed that to fade into part of the shell. So what I did, sort of airbrushed this in and then adjusted the opacity setting on it like that, and it does sort of pop the character a little bit. See, and then I turn down the opacity, and that works. It's a little bit of a blue area against the warm, and it's cool. I mean, it's working a little bit, but I don't know. Part of me, after I did it, I was like, you know what? If I'm putting too much color into this, I'm starting to render a little bit too much, and all I really need to do is just put a little bit of a darker green back there to separate the front of the head from the back of the shell, and that would work just fine. So, you know, part of your whole process at this point is just building up your character. So I'm going to go ahead and put that. I'm just looking at that bright white paper, which I hate. So I'm going to put a lighter, soft pastel tone color back here. And I want to rough up the edges a little bit so it doesn't look so crisp. And I definitely want to go with something that's just soft and a little warm, because I like some of the warm features on the character's face. And there's some blue in that shell, so the blue in that shell against that warm is going to help pop him a little bit more. So, and then what I'm going to do is, I hate having just hard edges, so I'm going to come over here and make some selections around the outside of the shell, and then I'm going to erase it. So it looks like it's sort of a rough piece, and then I'm going to put a little bit of a gradient in there with some other colors. I like gradations. Very light, soft pastel gradations are a great way to really have something pop with a character. It's just really simple and it makes the character come to life a little bit. So I made those selections and I deleted that right there. Do you see that outcome? It's pretty cool, right? It doesn't feel as, it's a little bit more softer. It doesn't feel as hard edged. And then when that's done, I'm going to come in here and see I just took the airbrush tool and I'm just going to put a little bit of a gradient going across the top there. And it's just, you know, a very soft gradient like that. Just that it's a little bit of that warm against some of the cool of the shell. I like it. It's simple. It's easy. The character reads now. It's not on a just white, you know, overwhelming surface. I need to do the toenails real quick before I forget. Of my turtle. And what else was I doing right here? I think I was going back through and coming in and putting a couple a little bit more adjustments. Oh yeah, here's the toenails I was just going to sketch in really quick. It's going to go a little bit different color here, a little warmer there, just offsets part of the skin color. Put some little tints of dark on the edges. You got to imagine their toes are pretty dirty. They're walking around, right? So and just offset it, and I can blend in the layer just a teeny bit here. That gets to be pretty good. Okay, so there we go. So, you know, I like the look on his face. Like the shell. It's sort of rough. I have some little hard unless I'm zoomed in. Some nice little texture that's in there, and if I turn it off and on, I like the read that's happening right there. It's simple. It's easy. It's not overcomplicated. It's not too rendered. But I like those highlights to just pop a little bit of his face there. So I'm just going through right now, checking some of my layers, merging some of them downward and committing to them, and then looking. Just to wrap this up, I think I'm going to come back in just a minute here, and I don't like the color of the underneath shell, and that's something that's really easy for me to fix inside Photoshop. Put a little bit more blue on there, but now I'm starting to indent the shell a little bit too much, so I might thin that down. I need to also adjust a little bit of my edges in here, clean up. I have a little bit of overspray over there. Okay. There we go. Right about there. That feels pretty good to me. Okay. So local color. Then you add your little bit of your texture spots. You can come in, put some little shadow adjustments, put a highlight or two. And you don't have to over render it as much. I'm just doing this as a sample because if you don't want to do just the standard local color, this is another option that you can do. But you can see I'm already into this about a good 30 minutes in terms of adding detail. So that's just fine for presentation. And the truth is that usually you don't want to render too much out of it because if they don't like it in its color form, you're going to have to go back and readjust it anyway. So you're going to lose time doing that. So I sort of know that in the back of my head, but for this, I think it's worked just fine. So one of my last phases that I'm going to do right now is I brought my character into Photoshop, and I always like this. I really like SketchBook Pro, and it works for a certain point, but there's just some controls I have in Photoshop that are a little bit easier. I wish SketchBook Pro had a better image adjustment and color saturation. And what I like about doing this is it allows me just to quickly get in there. And there's one or two things I wanted to fix before I finish up. One of the things was I really didn't like, let me hide my selection here. I didn't like this area right in here. It sort of blends together, and I wanted there to be more of a shadow behind the head. And what's really cool is I can come in here into Photoshop real quick. I can create another layer, and I'm going to try to address that really quick. So I'm going to pick a this sort of darker green color that I had in here. So I'm going to move it a little bit more to this side, and then what I'm going to do is going to come over here to a brush, and let me find what brush I want to use. Sorry, let me go back to a large thumbnail. Okay, there we go. So I'm just going to take something really simple and easy like this, and I'm up on this other layer. Now I noticed this layer for some reason it's down at 7%. That's why that was my shadow layer. I did before. Let me see if I can adjust that. So turns out I already sort of had it in here. But I don't like the spread. If you look at what this layer has, I don't like the way it came out with that blue. So what I'm going to do is just create another layer here. And sometimes it's just a little bit easier. You just get a little bit more control there. So I just created a really nice, simple drop shadow there. Okay. So I'm going to hit deselect. And now that I have that in there behind the head, I just drop over to opacity and I can just really lightly sort of blend that in. And it's just a way of anchoring down a little bit, and I need to soften a little bit of the edges right there. A couple of different ways I can do that. One is I could take my eraser. If I take my handy dandy, I love this guy, this little 36 here. It's a stock in Photoshop. I could do that. Another option I can do is I'm going to come down over here to filter. I'm going to go to blur inside Photoshop, and I'm going to go to a Gaussian blur. I'm going to just look at what my shadow looks like. I'm just going to punch up a couple of the pixels right here like this. So see, I just create a little bit more of a shadow. And there it blurs in just a teeny bit, like so. Bring it back. I like it a little bit crisp in the beginning. Then I'm going to come back over here, hit OK. Let's take my eraser, and I'm going to come back and just blend this in a little bit. It's very light. I'm at about just 10% right now. I'm just erasing a little bit of that, getting it to fade in. Erase it over some of those little details right there like that. Okay. So if I bring them down a little bit, I like to look at them a little bit smaller and look at the difference. I just wanted that in there to separate this from there. The other thing that I wanted to do, separate that curve from that little lip right there. I didn't put any highlights really on the shell. I could do that really quick. The other thing that was concerning to me was this lower shell. It was a little too green and I didn't quite like the color. And this is what I wish. I mean, a SketchBook Pro, if you guys could do something really cool, I wish they had a simple and easy, convenient tool like this, because I can go to hue and saturation, Control U, you can go to Control B, and I just wish there was some more selection options like this, because in Photoshop, you know, look, I can put a little bit more blue tint into it like that if I want. Or if I'm looking at it and go, hey, I want it to be a little bit offset green, I could adjust that. Just gives you some different varying options. Sometimes what I'll do on anything that I might paint is that I'll just duplicate a couple of the layers, turn off the original layers, and then I'll come back in here and just see what happens. If I go to color balance, what if I do put more green in that shell? You know, what if let's try the upper shell. That's the one I meant to do, my mistake. So if I come over here and I put a little bit more green into that, pop that green color, and I'm like, hey, that's sort of cool. I might really like that. But actually, in this case, it ruins some of the little highlights I had there. So I want to not do that. But just, what if I put more yellow? What if I go that route, you know? And what's cool is that you're affecting, you also have the chance to do the shadows, midtones, or highlights. So I could select just the shadows and now put a tint more blue into it and decide if I like that. And I just find that really efficient. It's just a great little way to touch up your work a little bit and to adjust a couple things. And I just think it's easy. It's fun. I mean, I wish some of these controls need to be made a little bit easier inside SketchBook Pro, because it's just, God, there's just some things you can do. Okay, so enough of me talking and gibble-gabbling here. I'm going to come over and I'm going to go to my lower shell here that I had. Actually, that's my copy right here. And I wanted to go to color balance. I wanted to see if I could change the color on that just by dragging this across. You know, maybe it's a little bit more, yeah, maybe it's sort of like that. Maybe it's just a little bit of a different color since it's underneath the turtle. That way it's not as similar as, now that's way ugly. So I like that look right about there. It's just a little off, a little different. Just because it's the underneath shell, right? So maybe that's not as exposed to the sun, and so it has a little bit of a different color. So I just like, that's a quick, easy way to make a simple adjustment. Okay, so I like that right there. I'm going to hit OK with that. And then I'm going to go back to the upper shell, and I want to mess with that for a couple minutes and just see what might happen to come. What if I drag that to a little bit? Now, what's funny is that if I go a little bit more blue with it, it's sort of cool because I have that red little back area behind it, and that's sort of neat. So I can decide, let me go over here. And then, of course, if you go back to 0, it shows you where it's at, where you started from. So I go a little bit towards the blue. That's sort of cool. It's just a little different. The other thing that I want to do is you'll notice this little back drop here that I put behind my character to sort of anchor him down. It's fading through other parts of the character. So if I turn it off and on here, some of that's showing up right here. So I'm going to take my eraser. I'm going to come in here and erase some of that right in here underneath that. Okay, there. So come back, let's make them a little smaller. So that's it. That's sort of cool. I could go in there, render it more, but I'm trying to keep this down to just like a good 30-minute just paint over of a character. Keep it simple. Just have some fun, and you'll be amazed once you get into a rhythm and you're working at home quietly and you're just painting into your characters, or whether it's an environment or doesn't matter, a prop. You get into this flow. You just need a nice quiet workplace, some good music, and you're ready to go. So thanks for watching, guys. Take care, and I'll talk to you later.